There's been some breaking news since Sony made mention that they wanted to acquire Kadokawa, and Kadokawa was fearing a potential buyout from foreign entities, aka Kadokawa. Now, to give some context here for those that are unaware of what's really going on, because this is a very important thing that's been happening now for the past few weeks, and it is something that all anime, manga, and light novel fans, and even those into merchandise, should be aware of, because this is legitimately very important that could fundamentally change the very landscape of anime, manga, light novels, and merchandise as we know it from the very source, because Kadokawa is a Japanese company that is stationed in Japan, not in the West, stationed in Japan, that Sony is trying to completely buy out, for they would own all the properties that Kadokawa owns. Now, to list just a minor few, not even the vast catalog, but a minor few things that they own, Kadokawa owns FromSoft and Spike Chunsoft. Now, if you don't know what FromSoft is, you've definitely been living under a rock or you're not a gamer. One of those two. But, the point is, FromSoft is already a massive grab. Like, for instance, if Sony just got that from the Kadokawa, acquisition, that would be huge. But obviously, there is a lot more at stake than that. I mean, we have Spike Chunsoft, which is, the individuals that created the recent Dragon Ball game, Sparking Zero, which is obviously very popular, a lot of people love, and they made countless other games prior to that that are incredibly popular. But it's not just the gaming catalog. They, in fact, also own basically the vast majority of the light novel market. Kadokawa does. Like, for instance, any major, very high-profile series that gets an anime adaptation usually spawns either from a manga or light novel, and a lot of times it's a light novel. For instance, good examples is, for instance, ReZero, Overlord, Konosuba, Tanya the Evil. You get the point. Very popular shows that a lot of people recognize. Kadokawa owns the publishing rights, so to speak, for these light novels. They are the ones that are able to allow these series to flourish and, thrive within the community in Japan and eventually get translated. They're also the individuals that allow, these series to maybe even get an anime. They're a big deal, okay? They are a big company that houses a lot of goods, so to speak. So if Sony was to theoretically acquire, Kadokawa, you could see that they would own a lot of the market at the very source. Now, to kind of briefly go over this next bit, basically, Sony already owns basically a monopoly in the West. They own Crunchyroll, Funimation, Right Stuff, and, if they do acquire Kadokawa, you could already see how bad that's going to get. I believe they'll also acquire Anime News Network, a big major news site as well that, Kadokawa, I believe, has ownership of. Don't quote me on that one. But basically, they would get pretty much a monopoly. Like, just straight up a monopoly. And since Kadokawa is a Japanese company, they wouldn't necessarily need to run into any monopoly laws or anything because, it's not a company stationed in the West. And I don't know how the laws are in Japan, gonna be honest. So I don't know exactly how monopoly laws and stuff work in Japan. Anyways, we fast forward to today, and obviously with some of the information I haven't covered and what happened today, I want to cover it in this video. So Microsoft and Tencent and Kadokawa has expressed interest in Kadokawa, but they prefer someone from local home country than a foreign entity. So what this means is that Kadokawa doesn't want to allow themselves to be bought out by these other companies, aka Microsoft, Tencent, and Kadokawa, because they want someone that was actually a Japanese company to buy them, because they don't want like a invasion on their company from like a foreign entity, so to speak. So that's why they are requesting Sony to buy them out. Now, here's the thing. Sony, at the end of the day, looking at everything on record right now, they are the lesser of the evils. Doesn't mean it's a good thing. At the end of the day, the consumer loses. There is no good thing here. No good news to really take away from this. But Sony is, in general, the lesser of these evils. We don't want Tencent, but for obvious reasons. I don't really need to dive into that. Kadokawa as well. Don't need to dive into that one. There's a lot of controversy. Just brief searches online. You'll instantly find out stuff about that. And then Microsoft as well. You get the point. It's just like, you obviously see why, Kadokawa wants to be bought by Sony. Once again, this doesn't mean it's a good thing, but you can see why. And the reason why this is happening is because, basically, Kadokawa has, like, their stuff up for grabs right now. And they want to have their future secured and not bought out by a foreign entity. So that is why they have turned to Sony. So with that being said, we fast forward to today. Basically, Kadokawa is ready for an acquisition deal with Sony. Both companies are now at the formal stage of negotiation, which is very encouraging according to Bloomberg. Kadokawa owns over 100,000 anime, novels, and comics, plus gaming. Sony stocks at an all-time high. You can see their stocks rising. So, what does this mean? Let's dive headfirst into that. So, what this basically means here is that it's over. For instance, Kadokawa is probably getting bought out by Sony, unless there is some form of very obscure or law I'm unaware of in Japan. Kadokawa is getting bought by Sony. So, what does this mean in a future where it's post-Sony owning Kadokawa? Well, let's look at the very obvious stuff. A bunch of things that most likely are redundant, or the copies of another site, or different ways of producing stuff is going to be completely removed. Okay, let's look at like what Sony did with Funimation and Crunchyroll, and Right Stuff as well. They basically defunct Funimation and Right Stuff and poured all that stuff into Crunchyroll. So, more or less, you can assume that they're going to do the exact same thing with whatever Kadokawa has. What they get on the table, what they will own, they will probably start shutting different things down and shoving it all into one meat pie. Maybe a few meat pies, but mostly just one meat pie. They'll get everything, all their acquisitions in order. That would be the obvious stuff. Then we got the long-term stuff, FromSoft, and other gaming companies that they will get a hold of. FromSoft obviously owns Dark Souls. They also, have made Elden Ring, and obviously Sony has a deal with FromSoft for Bloodborne. Now, obviously, this does mean, yes, there might be a Bloodborne 2 in the future. I still am in shock that we don't have a Bloodborne 2 yet, but the point is that Sony would own the Dark Souls series, basically. So they could push FromSoft to do what they want, and also make their stuff console exclusive. Now, will that happen? I don't think so. Looking at the landscape of, Sony's PlayStation, they have been releasing their games on PC, on Steam, so I don't think that they would be, let's say, locked to PlayStation. Now, there's a chance. I mean, let's look at Bloodborne. I mean, very good example there. I mean, it's always a possibility, but I do think that, in general, they probably would release Dark Souls games and Souls-like games and stuff on Steam. On Microsoft's Xbox, who knows? The point of the matter is that is obviously some long-term stuff when it comes to, like, gaming. As for anime and manga, the stuff that, a lot of people that, like, watch my channel like to, look at and watch and read, well, what probably could happen is quite a few things. For one, it means that the pipeline for what shows Crunchyroll gets will become increased. For instance, products that, Kadokawa works on most likely will be licensed out to Crunchyroll, which means that High Dive, aka a company that is a direct competitor to Crunchyroll that is owned by Sony, will eventually be strangled at the very source, and they will no longer be able to probably get a lot of shows that will give them a lot of profit, and their business will effectively die. Not good whatsoever. It effectively just kills any form of competition. On top of that, that doesn't even get into the censorship part that Sony does. Now, I know that there is very distinct departments, okay? And obviously, there is definitely a global shift right now with a lot of companies and stuff kind of shifting away from that. But it doesn't change the fact that we have had evidence for years that, stuff that Sony owns, not just in the gaming department, but in the anime department with their own company, stuff like Crunchyroll, there has been censorship, not just in terms of the translations or the English dubs, but also just straight up translations. Like, like the subtitles are completely inaccurate, they never fix it, the dubs are inaccurate, it's a lot of stuff they do. And so you throw all this in, it's only going to increase the problem, potentially, because they won't have to correct this, they won't have to try to be better, because they have no one to fight against, because they won. That's basically what this means. Sony wins. Now, obviously people might think, well, this might save me money. I can see everything potentially on Crunchyroll. Well, maybe. Depends. I mean, obviously depends country by country where Crunchyroll, operates, but Crunchyroll is not, a good company. I've talked about them a lot. Not gonna dive back into that, deep pit, but, they're not really good, okay? And so, I don't think that they'll have any incentive to better their product after this deal. I don't. So, once again, at the end of the day, I understand Kadokawa's situation and why they are trying to confront Sony and trying to make this deal. They don't want to be bought out from a foreign entity, like a foreign company or country. They don't want that. Completely fine. I understand that. But it sucks this has happened, and that now we're going to see, like, basically Sony is going to get the monopoly of the anime world, just like how Disney's kind of got a big monopoly in the West for the entertainment world. That's what's about to happen. So, I'll leave it at that. I just wanted to give a brief update for those that were curious if it was actually going to happen or not. Once more information does come out, I will cover it. But I love you guys. Be safe, stay healthy. Chibi out.